Welcome to the first video in a series on PivotTables basics. I'm Mike Groesser, and I'll be leading you through a variety of topics using short videos that are less than 5 minutes apiece. Now, if you're already familiar with PivotTables, maybe you've used them a lot in the past, but you just need to brush up on a few topics, or you're looking to expand your knowledge, there's a button down here in the lower right-hand side in your player that allows you to view the playlist, and you can view each of the videos and watch those out of order if you wish. Now, if you haven't used PivotTables before, or maybe you're just a very beginner using them, I do encourage you to go through this video playlist in order because we will build on each topic using information from the previous topics. So it'll be helpful if you follow in order, and that way you'll get the best understanding. So if you're ready, let's take a look at the information in front of us. I've got a table, and you've probably worked with some tables like this before. And if I scroll down, you'll see that this is a very long table. In fact, it's over 1,000 rows. So when I'm looking at this table, one of the first things that jumps out to me is it's a lot of information that I can't really do much with. Just looking at it, I don't know the average, I don't know totals, I don't know subtotals, I don't know groupings, I don't know how many from LMN partners, I don't know certain things about just Rick versus Chelsea. I don't know any of that information because it's all just here, row by row. There's unique records over and over and over. So it's difficult for me to aggregate that just looking at it. Pivot tables allow me to take this information and I can combine it. I can group certain areas. I can maybe group Rick's files. I can group by, let's say, customer. I can do things like summarize and average and count and all sorts of other functions. Pivot tables allow me to do that quickly. The other thing that pivot tables allow us to do is to move around the information, what they call slicing and dicing it, so I can look at it in a different way. And that's where our term pivot comes from, because I can take a row and pivot that to a column. Or maybe I take a column and pivot it to a row, and etc. And you'll see there's lots of ways we can move around information, and it's really up to you and your needs on how you want to do that. But one of the most important things to look at before we get started is, what do I need in my table before I can use a pivot table? How does my table have to be set up so that I can use a pivot table? And there's just a few criteria we have to look at, and one of them is to make sure that we have column headers in a row at the top of the table. And I do in this case. I've got date, associate, team, etc. These will be important because these will form the names of our fields later. And you'll see what I mean by that, but it basically gives us an identifier to use when we're moving and pivoting the information. Additionally, each row in our table has to be a unique record. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be unique in the fact that I couldn't have one where the date was the same and the associate was the same, etc. I could have a duplicate, that's okay, but each one has to stand alone. So this row cannot depend on information from another row beneath it. So they have to be independent. Another thing is, when we have columns in our tables, if we want to use a pivot table, we have to make sure that the column contains consistent information. So for instance, files processed has numbers in it. If all of a sudden I had A, X, Z in these cells here, that wouldn't work very well with my pivot table. I need to have consistent information. If I have numbers, I need to continue having numbers. If I had, say, percentages, I would need to have percentages throughout that column. I shouldn't mix percentages with dollar amounts. I shouldn't mix customer names with product ID numbers. Columns should be consistent information. Two other important points to look at before you get started is you want to scan your table and make sure that you don't have any completely blank rows. The reason for that is when Excel makes a pivot table, it's looking for a blank row or a blank column. And when it sees either one of those, it sees a blank row or a blank column, it's going to stop looking. So for instance, Excel would start up here and start looking over, and stop. And if I had a blank row, say on row 10, it would go down, down, and stop because it would see that the row is blank. And this is what it would be looking at when calculating my pivot table. So we can't have any blank rows or any blank columns. If you have a blank column, just delete the whole thing. Just get it out of there. So that's what we need to get started, and let's take a look in the next video how to actually create a pivot table.